I got some good feedback from you guys. That is really nice. You enjoyed it, and some fascinating talks this morning, this day. And what also, if you remember that at the beginning when we had all the dignitaries here, I was talking about, how we're going to use this as a stepping stone to something else. And one of the things that we were talking about is making sure that we actually have a better focus on what Brisbane did in World War II and how important it was. Now, if I listen to your talks, then it's very clear, what the importance of Brisbane was. And we even haven't covered all the subjects. So I can easily envisage, that if we collect information from all of you and we take the politicians with us and we start making a case for that, it won't be too difficult, all the elements that we've been talking about, are so interesting and can be, used as a stepping stone to the next thing. So what I think would be interesting to look at, how does the whole thing link together? How do you see? Because each of you are, highly specialized in particular areas, which are enormously interesting. How fit it all together? How works that together? How do you see that your little bit that you are involved in the bigger picture? That sort of elements. That's something I would like to check with you, what you think of it. And also because you all are experts, have you questions for each other? Have you things that you actually say, hey, I heard you talking about that. What does it mean? Or, hey, no, I don't agree with you, what you said, I think it's different, So a couple of these things that I would like to check with you. And just, I'm making it a bit broad. I'm not asking specific questions, but, things in your mind, because I'm going to ask each of you, to come with a comment or a question or a remark about today, and, then bring that together. But it starts a bit as a discussion in that situation. And perhaps I can start with you, Dave, because you're the first one, in front of me. Give some comments, some questions, some thoughts that you have, having participated in today.
Well, it's just been really fascinating seeing all the different dimensions covered in detail, and there are others that have been missed.
What have we missed?
Well,
flying boats that,
I didn't mean that anything's been missed in terms of coverage, but I mean you can't possibly cover everything in one symposium like this. But I just know that in Brisbane there was a myriad of organisations, some sort of involved with intelligence or some secret organisations. It's dizzying the amount of activity that was going on at many different levels. For instance, just to pick one, I know that there was a counter radar unit that was looking into tracking down Japanese radar so that they could be then destroyed. And then there was the Allied Intelligence Bureau and so on. So that's in no way intended to be a criticism. But it's just fun seeing a deep dive in different parts of Brisbane's role in the war, and including, I was thinking during Richard's talk, I was thinking this is very cool that here's somebody who's gone to the trouble to piece together this quite arcane piece of defence infrastructure, and how it all worked and where it was all connected. I thought that was quite fun.
Yeah, I think following what you were saying. So what I already mentioned, what the end result of today and tomorrow is that first of all we've got of course Peter's videos, that we have, and we are already talking about how we can use AI to abstract some critical information from that, so make it more accessible and use it. Then of course we're going to talk with Nonya, about papers. So you must have papers, or you might want to write paper about it, and we actually publish it. And we bring it together as a total collection. Then, following what you just mentioned, we can get out and say, hey, what are we missing? Are there other people with other information that we can add to it? So that's definitely something that we could do to that. So thanks for you. Please.
Three things. Number one, it was eye-opening to me to hear your speech last night at the City Hall about the involvement of the Dutch in Brisbane. I've driven through Wacol so much, and to think that there's a whole new world there that I knew nothing about, I think that's great. The second thing is I've been impressed with the range of speakers today. You know, the skills involved are remarkable, the interests are tremendous. The third thing is I speak as a member of the Newcastle District's Historical Society. They regularly get 100 people to their meetings each month, and I think that tells me that people are interested in history. They video their meetings, things like that. So I think there's an appetite for more knowledge about the place where people live.
Yeah.
And so if you expand that circle to a place where Brisbaneites live and what took place in the past, I think there's a big appetite.
Yeah.
Paul, is there a World War II museum in Brisbane?
There is the MacArthur Museum in Brisbane.
But that's obviously focused on...
Yeah, that's basically, it also gives a good, it's a good museum, it gives a good snapshot. But I think we need a little bit more in a modern way to connect, yeah? And to, also with digital and apps and that. So we can guide people to a museum or whatever. But nowadays, yeah, it's so difficult for people, to get people to go to a museum. I'm talking about the younger generation, yeah? So then, utilizing the digital technology to get them interested, and then can go to a museum. And then it doesn't really matter where the museum are. Kids fly over the world. They can go to museums in America or in the Netherlands or whatever. Yeah.
There are quite a few military museums in Brisbane. Our organisation owns one. Unfortunately, it's inside Gallipoli Barracks, so getting in to see is a problem. But there are some very good ones, especially Fort Lytton.
Yeah, and also it's a matter of, we have to collaborate more, I think, we have to, because a lot of these museums with volunteers and people get older and suddenly, it becomes far more difficult to handle these things. So, that sort of elements. We on our list of collaboration are 20 organizations around Brisbane, yeah, that are involved in the various elements, and that's a good sort of stepping stone, a good position to actually start working on that. Yeah. Tomorrow, by the way, we're talking more about the Dutch elements of yeah. So today we had more the American, the Australian one, and tomorrow we focus more on the Dutch ones and also the relationship with the Dutch East Indies and things like that. And also interesting what Adrian was talking about it, and also Paul Jack knows about it, and Nonya knows about it. There's a lot of information about Camp Columbia in Jakarta. Yeah, so that's where it ended up. So, there were, what did you say, 50 Adrian, 50? 200 pictures, are there, yeah? And there must be documentation as well, of course, yes? Yeah. So, that's, if you bring that together, I'm pretty sure, and we talked about it yesterday, yeah? In American museums, obviously a lot of you guys have already worked with American organizations, but, bring that together, yeah? In a more cohesive sort of situation that we can all share. And particularly, once again, if it's online and electronic, makes it much more easier, yeah. Thank you. Megan.
Yeah, I have to say, I think all the papers that were given today complemented each other really nicely. I mean, the things that I found that I had mentioned very briefly in my own discussion were picked up in terms of going into more detail about the New Farm submarine base, indicator loops and degaussing, the British Pacific Fleet, and all those things that kind of, if one person was sort of mentioning it briefly, somebody else was able to go into more detail about that and elaborate on those points. And I think for me, this whole day has really increased my own appreciation for Brisbane's role in the Second World War, especially in histories that I think are often kind of Sydney-centric in a way,
yes.
Especially in the Navy. Yeah. And so I think most of us will come away with a great appreciation of Brisbane's role as a key Allied hub in the Second World War. So it's very well done.
Yeah, Helen.
One of the thoughts I've had, and you've made a comment about basically virtual tours, but I also like the idea of really a physical tour as well, perhaps linked in with some form of tourism in the future, but having a sort of a centralised location to give samples of this information in some particular venue, either Camp Columbia, or I know that at the moment Hangar 7 is available, or is up that teetering edge of what do we do with this space we now have. So the insider historical, historical slip of the tongue. Was that a Freudian slip? I'm not sure. But inside a location like that, which brings another meaning to it. I know the gentleman who has put a lot of effort into the Trade Coast Historical Centre has looking at trying to make that more of a magnet for people. He's talking, for example, about trying to get the Smithy's Southern Cross relocated, because at the moment it's in a sort of a backwater area. So getting that located to somewhere where there's higher traffic, more acknowledgement. And I think the kinds of things that have been said here today really identify, as you've already said, that the knowledge that exists, the information that can be put forward, and there's something also about it being tangible as against just electronic. And I think there's a future for this historical tourism to take place as well. So.
The interesting thing, Alan, is that, and this goes back a little bit what I was complaining to Sarah about. So 3 years ago, when we had our first discussion with Brisbane City Council, the heritage persons there came with two things. One was you have to ask for a heritage listing. We don't hear anything anymore. The second thing was we should combine all of the Brisbane sites that have to do with World War II and promote that as a Brisbane tourist attraction. So I said yes, we're more than happy to do that. But I think we can be a catalyst in actually making that happen. And the bus tour, that Ethan is organising on Monday, is a good example of what we can do in a situation like that. But then it needs a little bit more oomph in the tourist side and the promotion side, to actually make that happen. And I know that Peter Dunn organises trips for Americans who are coming from America, veterans and family of veterans, who have a relationship. They actually come to Australia quite often. Not everybody, but quite often there are groups. And then Peter Dunn organised something like that. So if we combine that, we can actually make it, a Brisbane thing rather than an individual sort of thing. And we need venues always. So Hangar 7 could be a good point there as well.
Just on the topic, just on the topic of museums, I was kind of disappointed quite recently, like a few years ago. 21 Henry Street, which is where Central Bureau was based, came up for sale for the first time in, decades, and I thought it would have been made to drop a couple of $1 million on that, especially since Australian Signals Directorate is they're undergoing these recruitment drives, and I thought there could be, if they just bought that and turned it into a museum and advertised it as Australia's version of Bletchley Park, and, I thought it would have been a great awareness raiser, but. It didn't happen that way.
I think.
I don't even think it's heritage listed actually.
No.
So,
I think it is Brisbane local.
It is now. Okay.
I can double check for you.
Can you please? Alan, there was something else.
One of the things that I tried to do, so this emphasises again this issue of bureaucracy is like a big flywheel that takes a lot of time to get energy into it. Over 2 years ago, I tried to organise a brass plaque on a rock outside of Hangar 7 to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Second World War flight of that A6M3 Type 32. I thought I'd had it all organised, thought I had all the nods going in the right way in the meetings, and some great. And then it just fell flat on the floor. So I think part of the issue is about having obviously the right political connections, if you like, but also enough power behind the committee that fronts up to these particular people. So
and that I think two things happening today and tomorrow. We are getting a little bit more combined. We had two politicians here who were both clearly indicating that we are interested. So, we've got something. I mean, they promise always things, I realise that, but at the same time, we've got the contacts, and sure we will use them. Yeah. Ethan.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, the common theme is about how do you leverage these resources, how do you leverage this information and this content to better exhibit both the history and put Brisbane on a map. And this kind of comes into how Brisbane is viewed in the collective memory of not just Brisbane's experience of the war, but Australia's experience of the war. Did any of you guys see the Conversation article that came out recently with a study on Australian knowledge of military history that Peter Dunn had sent to us? So in that study, it was a poll of 100 Australians across a broad spectrum. It was found that World War I and World War II were the most well-known conflicts, and that World War II most people knew kind of maybe of Corregidor, although that was fairly low. Most people knew about the bombings in Japan, for instance, and other elements were far lower down this list. And this is a more holistic view of Australian society. We've got to remember, we here are biased. We are the people who come along to a 2-day symposium on military history after all. But that same study also found, as the others have mentioned, that war memorials and war museums were a very valuable source of history, that they were rated highly in trustworthiness, although they were rated lower in terms of regularity of access, whereas personal stories, family stories, and objects are rated higher in terms of familiarity and access, but lower in terms of trust. So having a think, there's no easy answers in this, but having a think as we go forward, leveraging those ideas that we've talked about, how do we leverage them to reach not only those who are of a relatively small minority within Australia who are inherently interested in this sort of content, how do we make it more accessible for people as a whole, often without placing more onus on those who don't have a lot more resources. So people often talk about we should teach more history in schools, but if you actually go into the nitty-gritty of trying to teach more history in schools, it becomes very difficult, right? So having a look at how can we do things like leveraging our photo content, how can we leverage our knowledge, how can we establish war memorials that are easily accessible and pass that information within, as mentioned, the kind of the boundaries of bureaucracy. And also thinking about things like film can be a really powerful conveyor of information. A lot of people, has anyone seen the series The Pacific?
Yeah.
Very well known. What's part of Australia is shown in that Melbourne, right? So there's very few displays of wartime Australia, and one of the best interpretations we have is the section of Melbourne. Again, that's something that's a much larger scope. It's hard for us to simply implement that, but different ways that different media can help make that legacy not only more well known in Brisbane, but on an international or
on that point, we, as a result of today already, we've got 3 people in now offered to help with education.
Oh, fantastic.
So we've got a centre where we can do it. Is the lady from Wolston House here? No?
I think she's gone.
She's gone. And then we've got Elizabeth and we've got Hannah. Yeah. They are going to assist us with some education, because that is indeed, because one of the big things is also how we get the young people involved in this. Yeah, that's far more difficult. Yeah.
And I think that needs a conversation. What you're suggesting is we're trying to find ways to bridge the gap back to the public. And that's what I always want to do.
Yeah.
For instance, the welcome walls in Perth, in Fremantle, when we launched the last lot of that, 8,000 people came.
Yeah.
You know, because their name's on it. There's a book with their name in it.
Yeah.
There's things to acknowledge that life. To bridge the gap, we've got to find a consumption that does that. You know?
I think the historical tourism is interesting for Moreton Bay, the Moreton Bay defences, because as you saw, most of the stuff is just going into the sea. The northern end of Bribie is broken through with the
The last straw.
Most of it's gone now. I mean, really, Fort Bribey consists of a sewage treatment plant. That's about all that's left.
We've got the sewage plant, by the way.
And in the south, down around Moorum, you know, there's the concrete hut, and there's a couple of generator huts, but there's no signage on them anymore. You know, they get vandalised very quickly, and it's all boarded up. No one knows what's going on. And then Fort Rouse, there's a lot of buildings still there, but no signage. The only people who really look after Moreton Island is the Tangalooma Resort. Now they have, in their foyer, they have a lot of photos, the little plates from the guns that were used over there, things like that. But it's all, and then down around Pinkenbar, the Brisbane City Council has a sign on the photoelectric beam that was protecting the, you know, across the river. There's a hut there, but none of it's connected. You know, it's just all separate things. So that, you know, somehow it needs to be connected into one sort of idea as Royal Navy Defences, Royal Australian Navy Defences. The other thing is, it's probably a provocative question to ask: did the defences make any difference to the war? And I mean, would the Japanese have come in anyway? And the answer is probably no. So whether the loops and so on, the guns were there, probably made no difference. They weren't coming in because after being 3 midget submarines being demolished in Sydney, they probably knew, well, they did know that the Australians had loops because they captured the loop defences in Penang a few months earlier. So they captured the loop station and they worked out what was going on. So they knew about it, so possibly it made no difference anyway. But you know, no one was to know that.
Probably improved morale.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And you're having a defence, you know, even if it's not attacked, you know, okay, you are defending. It's already
Whereas in West Australia they did, in Broome and places like that, you know, and we had a lot of deaths.
Absolutely.
Yes, it's a hard one, but I must admit this has been a very enlightening day today, and I've learned a lot, and particularly about the Dutch presence at Camp Columbia. I'm a North Sider, so I don't know much about, you know, pass through on Ipswich Road. But anyway, that's been a real eye-opener. And I wonder, 2 challenges really. There's a younger generation. How do you engage them? And I look at the river, which is my interest, of course, the Maritime Museum. And all of the sites have been redeveloped by these multi-story units, residential units. It lacks all of the sense of what was going on in World War II. Younger people that I know, there's some of them that are madly interested in World War II because of the actions. But what we've got to show them is pretty bland. And I must admit, your concrete bunkers down Brisbane are not particularly gripping.
Hold on, the sewerage plant in Pool Corner, Wow, that's a gripping thing.
But we did, at the Maritime Museum, we did commemorate the 7th Fleet being born here. And that display is still there with artefacts and quite a lot of stories. How you get the stories out there, and I think the stories are important, both in connecting with the younger generation and embracing our multicultural society. So we've got the Dutch influence is an important aspect of that, but you've got also Vietnamese that we have talked about with
Indonesia,
and I think how we can tell the stories in a way which embraces the whole community and also gives them that physical association, the country connection. That's important, and I'm very keen that the museum and history associations that we have represented here and around the city and elsewhere do get connected and talk to each other and get some combined programs going, which would be engaging.
What we, for example, could do is ask the Lord Mayor to invite a number of organisations, because if the Lord Mayor invite, if I invite, nobody comes. If the Lord Mayor invite, everybody comes. So, and he's keen to lift Brisbane. So one of the things he could do is, say we organise it, but he sent out the invitation to 20 organisations or 30 organisations that we combined can think of, and invite for a round table and have a bit of a discussion about that. For example, a possibility we could do.
So get it on TV.
Sorry?
Get the story on TV.
Yeah, that's always so difficult. We need the media involved. We had 2 radio interviews, 3 radio interviews, but I couldn't interest the television. So.
Have you tried Martha Dusseldorp?
No, I know Martha, but she lives here?
She lives in Tasmania. She
Yeah.
wrote Balefires 1 and Balefires 2. She would be up to creating a proper documentary or so. And she has the clout.
Yeah, we need a few people with clout.
Yeah.
True, correct, Okay, questions from the audience?
And she has
Yui.
that gun, so
I would like to speak perhaps as a representative of the younger generation.
Yes, thank you.
The young people need to be involved. I'm not the youngest here, but I would like to say something. 2 things that get me involved is the personal stories. So I'm not a military historian. I don't really connect with, stories of this battalion moved here at this stage and this one came in. I don't follow that. But what gets me interested is, the story of Jo, who was at Camp Columbia, and her connections to Camp Columbia, what work she did, what her everyday life was like. Those really personal stories that make the history come alive. So that's one way that we can do this, by highlighting these personal stories. And David, we did that in your presentation by drawing on a few of the people who were breaking these codes. So that really got me, yes, this was really cool. The other thing which Gerard did as well is by bringing to life, the places that we know today, what did they look like, in this case, 80 years past. I think that's super, super interesting. When people who are buying apartments in West End and wherever, who have no idea what that looked like, what that place looked like 80 years before, if we can bring those comparisons out, a little bit like Ed has done here with the maps as well, when you can see present day what we look like, how big and what it actually was. I think that's a way, I don't know how we get these stories of these in media to the young people, but that's a way that you can draw them in, get interest, and then maybe, keep that interest going, get them connected.
Yeah, we of course, have already, in any case, a couple of dozen personal stories on the website, So we collect personal stories. As you already, for example, Auntie Teresa, she will add another story to it, We've got other people that, when we have links. What Milton was talking about, the Vietnamese, was another interesting thing, that they ended up in Wacol, So, that's another possibility. So it's linking these things together, that makes it interesting.
I think wars link it together. You see, we're all here because of a war. I'm here because of World War II. So all the migrants that I studied first of all were here because of the war. Displaced persons, all of that. It's all stories about
personal story. And that's, I think I mentioned that in the beginning of very clearly. It's not about a bunch of stones or the collect. Right, it's a story behind it. If you've got a nice story about people, say, I want to see this bunker, even if it's a ruin, doesn't matter. But once you have the story, then then suddenly it starts making sense for people to see that.
Yes, I'm totally agreeing, and I think whether it's young people, middle-aged people, or seniors, we have diverse interests, and I think. It's what I said about in the eulogy about my relationship with Jack and Jack's relationship with me. We were able to combine our thinking in terms of military history, military engagement, and also peace and the movement for peace. And we are now really at the 80 years after the war, and moving on to the, in 20 years it'll be a centenary. And the end of war is about peacemaking, so the problem in public perception is that somehow peace is the absence of war. Peace is, I think, rolls out of the conflict, out of the war, in terms of what it is, and the activities that we have to do, which was in 1945, 46, that nations came together to look at the strategies, the operations that they had to do to create and produce the peace.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important theme amongst the stories.
Totally agree with you. Yeah.
What is very popular in Holland at the moment is that we have guest speakers who tell the personal stories in schools.
Yeah.
And this is quite an organization now, and they train them and they tell the personal stories, and the kids love it.
Yeah, there's definitely the problem with with this particular topic is that the people who can tell stories are now the kids and grandchildren of the people that were there. But still, we have Natalia. Where are you? There she is. And there's a fantastic story of her mother, yeah?
My father.
Your father, yeah.
Grandmother.
Yes, grandmother, yeah. And, so an absolutely fascinating story, yeah? And it can be told by a person like Natalia, yeah? So, we have to then get the interest of the Ben and Renee, you're another one, that can talk a story about your dad, yeah? And things like that. So, we can use these people to do so. Renee, you want to say?
I have tried, indeed, to talk at schools, but at this moment what I find is that most of the schools have got such a rigid program, curriculum, that it's difficult to come through. So, maybe we have to find a way to
get
into
and the interesting thing there is Woolston House, which is an 1860 house in Brisbane, very close to Waco. They have an education program. They get kids in, regularly. It's all organized. They've set up for that, and they're asking for us to come and talk about our story. So, here we've got a possibility where we can say yes, we can tell stories and we can bring in people to do that. And that's something that Elizabeth and Hannah, that are the sort of things we can think about if you start talking about education.
Can I just say there too, in terms of exposure, as you're aware, Anzac Square is another place where people can speak, and they have wonderful speakers there.
Yeah.
Some are second generation, talking about what their fathers did in New Guinea or whatever.
Yeah.
I've seen a couple recently, just brilliant, just exposing things that we don't know about. For example, there's two little villages, one man spoke about, that we don't know the names of, because the Coda name has overwritten all the other important things that also happened there. So that's another place. And the other thing I was just thinking too, State Library, they have an art gallery space that we could display something there for 2 or 3 months at a time. In fact, I've got a couple of spaces. So
Ethan works there, so we've got direct entry. We've got direct entry. And I know they're open. I've spoken there a couple of times. And if, for example, Paul Jack had a little bit more time, they asked if we could do a presentation with you. So they're keen to do things like that. Yeah. So we definitely want to use that, and you get people. It's really interesting to do that. And that's a good venue to use. Where you work. Yeah.
What was my question?
Okay, Natalia.
Can I just pick up on the topic of curriculum design? And I think it's something that we should really keep front of mind to one side that we can produce a lot of material, we can attack this on a lot of fronts of raising this awareness and actually getting this information out there. But for the young people in schools, and I have 2 children who've just finished high school, and World War II, very much still part of the curriculum. It starts with Pearl Harbor. They jump over pretty much everything to the end, and they focus on the European War, which I find very interesting because that's the way we did it. And I'm also young, you know, so 20 years ago or so, 30 or 40 years ago, that's the way we did it in my era. And I actually had thought, because I thought, oh no, surely by now Australian curriculum actually looked at the Pacific War, the war that was in our theatre. So I think that's a challenge, and actually when you lay it out like that, it's obvious that it's time that our curriculum moved on. I understand the secondary schools are sort of confronted because they're very front of mind getting the children to into university, but we can actually see if we can design modules and work with curriculum design for upper primary first, and it's exactly the age group that enjoy coming out to these locations. We can construct stories, we can personalise it, the stories of children when we're talking especially about the Indies and what happened to children in Singapore or children here, and how did then what Brisbane was doing, how was that pivotal in changing the narrative and ending the war to save these children, for example. That's one way in, but I think we need to keep that in mind and actually go into the curriculum.
Yeah, thank you. Adrian.
Reinforce that. So my experience is, as an expert on Indonesian history, that in New South Wales, Indonesia is actually in the HSC history curriculum, but in every year there's maybe one school that will teach it, and that's because they don't have the materials. So the teachers are looking for materials. So if you can provide them with that, you'll find that there are probably spaces in the curriculum that exist where you can put that in. They're not going to take the initiative necessarily because they're overworked in certain areas.
I think, you know, our task could easily be, just preparing it. We've got the knowledge, and it's a matter of you know, getting that knowledge together and then offering it to schools, you know. They don't have to do other things than only facilitating this situation to happen. That I think, you know, we can't ask them you create all the information or the program, but we can assist in that. So yes.
Sorry, can I just follow up on a point that Gary made. And certainly the big takeaway from today's is the personal story, personalising. And that's good. You already mentioned in terms of younger generation, getting them involved. You mentioned the before and after in terms of the locality. Yeah, sure, we can do the two-dimensional layouts, but the big gap I see, and that's where some smart young graphic minded people could get involved.
Who's standing next to you, you mean, you know?
3D visualisation, so that you can interpret the 2-degree plans and have visualisation. You can look at this sewage treatment facility at Blue Corner, what it is now, look at your QR code and up pops an image of what it was, and then a fly through panning round where you're standing so you can visualise how big the cat was, that type of thing. So
all this needs tiny bit bigger, though.
There might be some young people around, so anyone who knows anyone, you know, perhaps in their 20s.
Yeah, you could make a project perhaps with students, students involved in digital technology. You know, we could.
Virtual reality.
Virtual reality. Paul Jacques.
Maybe some experience from Europe and from the Netherlands. We have the same kind of problems, and we've been thinking about this quite a long time. I think what I missed today is not criticism, but is most of the people living in Brisbane so many people from outside came in, from Europe, from America, from the Netherlands, East Indies, but they interacted with the local people. And you also have to get the attention of the local people. You have to talk about their experience. We have a tendency to send we have so much knowledge, you have to know about it. Those young people, if you start, you have to do this, then of course they don't react to it. But if you talk about their grandparents and their local situation, like you said, okay, what Doreen said, your own space. Yeah. What did it look like during the Second World War? But I think you should focus now also on the people living in Brisbane. I don't know how large the population was during the Second World War. 400,000 people. That's a huge amount of people that lived here during the Second World War. They have their own experiences. So what happens to you when you live here and so many people come in here, and who is doing all the work at the wharves, and who prepares the food for all the people coming in? So these experiences are super interesting for the locals. And if you focus on that, then next phase will be, okay, what happened actually? Why did they come here? That's the next question, and then you can send your information.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And there were a couple of stories where you talked about, somebody, a young boy who was participating, who saw the submarines and things like that. So we do have a couple of stories, but I totally agree with you that are really the experience of the Brisbane people self. Although the stories that we can gather from them is another sort of element that we definitely should think about.
One extra thing is that we did a lot of research with young people in the Netherlands about how important is the Second World War, because we thought, or many people thought, it's 80 years ago, it's a long time ago, maybe we should move on, and we don't have to think about it anymore. But actually we found that young people think the Second World War is super important, but they think about it differently than maybe the first generation. They want to commemorate, and they also want to celebrate liberty, freedom and stuff. But they do think that commemoration is super important.
Yeah, and I, a couple of times also Ned was talking about it, because okay, the war, but in the end we've got peace. And look what we've been able to do after World War II. The fact that we are here in this beautiful room with all these people playing soccer, whatever. It's all the end result of what has been built up after World War II. Yeah, and I think the importance, especially in this time and age where we see all the conflicts and lots of trouble happening. Yeah, is emphasizing the importance of peace at the end of war and what that can do if you treat it well, if you come together as nations and things like that. That's why I also find this allied concept so important. We've got 4 countries involved in it, who have been friends, the friendship was absolutely formed during World War II. The Australians were only looking at Britain. Britain left them alone in World War II. We went to the Americans. Since that time, the Americans are there. Netherlands had no relationship with Indonesia. In the war, the first ambassador arrived. Since that time, the Netherlands and Australia are much closer, etc. So you see how important, the war has been in creating these friendships, in creating these alignments. And I think, and I was talking to the ambassador about it. One of the things that I would have loved to do is actually have a speaker who then tells, okay, thank you very much for World War II. What does it mean now? What is the reason that not the reason? What's the effect? Of World War II in the situation in 2025? What have we learned? How we can do that, etc. It's definitely something is still in my mind. That I want to talk about. I also spoke to Paul Jacques about it, and perhaps we can tomorrow also, think about that sort of lessons learned. What can we do about it, etc. Anneke.
I just have a bit of a thought about how you can attract the younger people, and I find in Australia there's basically one way of attracting them, and it's through food. If there's food available, they will come. So on that thought, I was driving that a little bit further, and I thought maybe we should try and develop some sort of celebration, which will incorporate all those elements you just mentioned. Make it a commemoration, maybe once a year at Camp Columbia, at the site. Have all sorts of things, Dutch food, whatever going as well, hot dogs, whatever, the American side. But at the same time have demonstrations of the historical impact of what has happened there, and maybe some samples of the electronic, the visual, all that technical stuff can come into it as well.
And that's something that Natalia, when we had lunch, you mentioned, that, for example, we could use the 15th of August, I mean, it's petering away, it's hardly ever mentioned it's a little bit done, an RSL club here, an RSL club there, but if we combine something, and again, we use the Allied combination, and we do something around it, and it's something we could organize. But
I'd like to start or say something about the overall thing rather than the detail, because I'm not a details person. If I listen to this, we are very fragmented. Everybody's an expert, but nobody really talks to each other. We're trying to, and that's what you're saying. But I think we're all relying on gifts from other people. Very hard to survive, each one of us. I would suggest let's all sit down around the table and try and make a plan that says, okay, this is what we want to achieve, and if we do that as a big group, we can approach the government and come up with ideas that say, we will become self-sufficient, provided you give us a fair bit of dough to start off with, and once you are self-sufficient, you can do all sorts of things. But as long as we rely on, you've said it yourself, you think you've got something and then you don't, and you don't get anywhere. And I would suggest sit down all together, work out what we really want to achieve, and if we can work that out, then you can say, well, we go to the council or we go to the government and say, we want a building. That building over there is just nice. Thank you. And they will be more, keen to do that rather than each one of us trying to do something. So try and do it collectively, but work out a plan. Once you've got that plan, get the young ones involved. That's the other thing that I've mentioned it once before. Get the young ones involved, and the food idea was number one. Food they go for, and I'll give you a little thing that we did with two of our grandkids some years ago. Said, let's go to the Railway Museum in Ipswich. And I thought, oh God, And what do they do? Because the kids are very hard. All they do is have this phone and do that. And what happens? We go there, and before you get into it, they have this competition or whatever it is for young kids with plastic bottles, and they pump them up, and then it blows off. No, it sounds stupid, but they were queuing up and then go into the display of the railway line and have a great time. And they get interested. But if you just show them these dead locomotives, they just stand there. But it was this attraction that the mothers can come up with them, and the kids want to go there. And we can think of all sorts of things, think of the food. So let's be creative and work it all out together around a round table, not a square one, round, and become bigger and therefore more powerful, and we can then also instead of having 20 little websites, we can have a big one that covers it all and brainstorm. So sit down and let's work something out, what we want to achieve.
Yeah, and that's what I mentioned before, was the Lord Mayor could send an invitation out, and we sit around the round table. Let's do it that way. Peter, you also want to say something?
Yes, I've done over the last 5 years a research paper for the Lord Mayor, and we've documented 200 in Brisbane World War II history sites, museums, locations. And Adrian is a really great supporter of tourism, and the hook will need to be, in my opinion, tourism as well as the broader historical concept and ideas. And to give you a bit of an idea, there is a national memorial, and Brisbane doesn't have that many, probably about 2 I think, a national memorial to the 50th anniversary of the ending of World War II. It's called the National Australia Remembers Freedom Wall, and I bet if I ask now, put your hand up if you've been there, yeah, like 5% of the population. And
I've been quiet.
And historically, Brisbane's got really some great artefacts. The Diamantina. And on the back of the Diamantina, there were 2 signings of the peace treaties that were recorded. Now, the next time the Brisbane River floods, the Diamantina won't rise with the floodwater, it will stay precisely where it is. And it's because there's not been enough attention to the maintenance and the restoring and the respect of the Diamantina. And it will join the Forceful, which is a very sad story to tell, but a very necessary story for the finances of the Queensland Maritime Museum. And I'll just end with a little fact I bet you will find surprising. On the 22nd of December 1941, Pensacola convoy arrived in Brisbane, and it arrived, that was the first on-ground help that the Americans gave the Australians. And you know, they marched up Racecourse Road, they set the tents up, and it was a really significant historical day in Brisbane. And I know how important it was because Frank Moore used to badger me every month about what are you doing about a memorial for Pensacola convoy. However, 6 years to the date, 6 years to the day, 22nd of December 1947, a really significant historical event occurred in Brisbane. And you might know, David, I bet you, or you do, because I probably told you. However, 1,970 odd American coffins were loaded up onto a Victory ship, which was a follow-on of the Liberty ships. And they were all accumulated in Brisbane, and they were loaded up on this Victory class ship. And in the Ipswich cemetery there were 17 unknown US servicemen that they didn't know who they were. And on the 22nd of December 1947, 6 years to the date, in Brisbane there was the parade of an unknown US serviceman. First time in Australia's history of a parade of an unknown serviceman, and it was loaded up onto the USA Gaucho Victory. So Brisbane has this incredible historical opening chapter of World War II, the arrival of the Pensacola convoy. It has an incredible historical closing chapter. We have 200 World War II pure memorials. There are another 40 odd which are World War I and World War II. Our history is incredible, and Paul, you really deserve A1 pat on the back, because what you're doing is just significant and well worthy of support. And yes, the Lord Mayor is listening.
Thank you, Peter. Just looking at the time, because you know drinks are. Oh yeah, okay. Got one or two questions.
G'day, Alan Victor, I'm the Vice President of the 9th Battalion Association, and I really thoroughly enjoyed this day. Bringing 43 years, I worked here at the University of Queensland, and 46 years as an Army Reservist, so I've got some knowledge of the background. And I'm just thinking about, we need, as mentioned before, we need to get together, but I think we also need to engage some stakeholders from either the War Memorial, the State Library or the Queensland Museum, or even the university on a scholarship for students to provide, or somebody to provide And I went back to Roger Marks, who started out, he's definitely not a computer guy, but he started out with his paper and photos, and then suddenly a KMZ file was given to him. So he made a map, an interactive map. And so that could be a focus of a research for students. I know the University of Melbourne did the Australian Wars, which were the wars against the Aboriginals, and that had wide implications for the whole nation. And I look back at 1995 and the Courier Mail, for the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II, produced a map of Queensland, the battle camp locations of the whole of Queensland. And that paper sold more papers that week than in any other time in our history. And because before internet, before the phones, you know. Yeah. So, and a map like that, as we said, it's spatial.
Maps are. Are you listening, Ed? Maps.
And nowadays, when you can click on the link and up pops a PDF or an interview with a person. But I think we need a key stakeholder to buy into the and provide a scholarship or something like that to produce it.
Thank you. I would like to close now because otherwise, you know, we now need a drink. So hopefully that most of you can stay and walk over to the restaurant, St. Lucia restaurant here on the campus. I think it was an interesting day. I'm very, very happy for the interaction that you guys are giving. That makes it so more interesting, so more pleasant for everybody, for the speakers and for yourselves. So thank you very much for all of that. Once again, thank you for the speakers who were here today, and I would like to ask you all to put your hands together for the speakers. And we definitely come back to you guys. You're on the list. You can't get off the mailing list, so you will be on the mailing list. We will discuss this.